Hello and welcome to How to Overcome the Copper Sunset. This is a webinar we've got two celebrities on this webinar to be answering my questions. We've got Sam Aldridge from T-Mobile. We've got Chris Berge from Ooma. My name is Dave Michaels. I'm from Talking Points. I'm an industry analyst. I cover enterprise communications of all kinds, from UCaaS to contact centers to CPaaS and all kinds of stuff. But we're going to get today into the nuggets of how to keep critical equipment connected as POTS lines go away. So with that, let's get some introductions of our guests out of the way. We've got Sam Aldridge. He's I'm going to read this to you. Senior Product Manager within the IoT Ready to Deploy Product Solutions Group at T-Mobile. He manages the product lifecycle of several IoT solutions, which includes partner relationship management, delivery systems, onboarding, sales enablement, and product solution fulfillment. With more than 26 years in the telecommunication industry, his tenure at T-Mobile spans 24 years where he has worked in various positions, allowing him to positively guide multiple facets of the customer experience. And we've also got with us Chris Berge. He's a VP of Corporate Development at Ooma. I've known Chris for at least a decade. I don't even know how long we go back, Chris. And he's responsible for mergers and acquisitions, strategic partnerships, and driving Ooma's strategy for enterprise unified communications as a service. Prior to joining Ooma, Chris was Vice President of Corporate Strategy at ShoreTel. So with that, introductions out of the way, let's start off with Sam. Sam, what's happening with the copper sunset? Because I love copper sunsets. I was just in California. I love copper sunsets. What's wrong with this?
Well, we're not going to be talking about the color that you love so much, but what we're going to be talking about is something that the FCC signaled back in August of 2019, and that was that the PSTN is headed toward an inevitable sunset. So basically what they have done is in August of 2022, they finally lifted their oversight of POTS regulation. And so carriers are not required to continue POTS service any longer. So what we're going to have is a challenge for our organizations and companies that their services rely on POTS or plain old telephone services. So that's the challenge that we have. Once this sunset happens, customers are going to be looking for ways to regain their position in their communication format.
POTS, I think, was the first acronym I learned in telecom. First jargon piece I learned. I was a little disappointed to find out it meant plain old telephone service, but nonetheless, important jargon for the industry. And as you said, it is going away. So Chris, what's the result of this sunset?
Well, the first thing is you're dating yourself, Dave, by letting us know that POTS was the first acronym you learned. But this is it's a really fascinating situation. As Sam mentioned, the FCC order allowed for the deprecation of copper lines, but probably equally as important is that order also provided forbearance into the incumbent carriers. And what that means is beyond having their discretion for when they shut down the lines, they're no longer regulated on what they can charge for those lines. And so as a result of this, we've seen dramatic price increases with POTS lines, and that's only going to continue to accelerate. This is a forcing function, to be honest, for a lot of the incumbent carriers to try to drive those customers away. Similarly, they've neglected this infrastructure for a long time now, and there's a fascinating report that came out of the California Public Utilities Commission that looked at the quality of the copper network in the state of California across those carriers. And while it also discovered the price increases, it actually measured the degradation of the network, and it's very, very significant. And part of that is not maintaining the legacy infrastructure, but part of it is also that all the technicians that learned POTS as their first acronym, for instance, are retiring or have retired. So they don't have the same fleet of folks to go work on the infrastructure. And the real issue that we're faced with here is a lot of the easy devices to migrate from POTS lines have largely migrated to other solutions like UCaaS platforms, for instance. And so we're left with a lot of specialty devices out there that for the longest time the broader communications industry would just say, we'll go get a POTS line and put those devices on it. And so it's really created quite an impending event and risk factor for a lot of organizations grappling with maintaining these systems and also maintaining affordable bills, frankly, for POTS lines.
It's interesting because, I mentioned, and I've known you for a while, the industry's moved away from copper for a long time. So Sam, is there really any copper left?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of copper left. And Chris kind of mentioned this. There's a lot of critical life safety and other devices that are still on analog. And that's really where we need to focus as far as what's at most risk with this deprecation. So, you've got elevators, elevator phones, fire alarm panels, security panels, PBX trunks, gate access phones, safety blue light phones, boiler rooms, and other door entry intercoms, things of that nature. Well, what we need to consider here is that it really isn't worth the risk to lose communication to these types of services, which impact employees, tenants, customers, you name it. There's a lot of risk that can be involved once these lines are no longer available and go sunsetted.
Continue, please. What are the options?
Well, that's a big question. What are our options? And as you can see on the screen, let's tackle them 1, 2, 3 here. We can either just hope and pay, which I like that. You are praying maybe, but in this sense, it's going to be hope and pay. That's going to be keeping the status quo. You don't have to do anything about it, but your costs will certainly rise and it will impact you when the lines are turned down. Secondly, you can choose to rip and replace. And what's that going to do, right? You're going to have costs associated there. It's very impractical to do that option. And if you do have embedded devices, you're going to have some renovation that's going to have to take place. And that's going to equal time and money. So really, the option is to find a POTS replacement solution. So altogether, let's eliminate the dependency on POTS and see what's out there.
Hope and pay. I guess over time it becomes hopeless and pay more based on what you were saying.
Exactly.
So Chris, tell us about some POTS replacement solutions.
This is a great, fascinating category that has emerged over the last 4 to 5 years to begin to address the modernization, if you will, of these legacy copper lines. And it falls into multiple buckets. So there are things as simple as devices called communicators, for instance, that operate with alarm panels and fire panels, purpose-built. They only serve those types of devices. They don't help you with anything else in the environment. And then there's more general solutions in the category that look to effectively emulate a POTS line. So whatever type of device is plugged into it actually doesn't know that it's not a POTS line. And the intent here is to really bridge that gap and make it easy to transition those legacy solutions, whatever the nature of the use case may be for those, into something that operates over wireline or cellular or some combination of both of those, with tools that are built to really help with understanding the environment, simplifying deployment, monitoring what's going on in the environment. And the main intent here is maintaining reliability of those systems, especially life safety, and saving money, of course, as these bills continue to go up drastically.
Are those rabbit ears?
They do look like rabbit ears.
Well, tell us how do I get a POTS replacement solution, Chris?
Yeah, so there's a variety of different ways to go through this process. There's a number of solutions on the market. Engaging with T-Mobile will be a great entry point to understand the options that are available. But the very first step that's important is understanding your environment. Performing an audit, if you haven't done this in years, which is not necessarily uncommon, of all those analog lines that you have and you're paying for, and the types of devices that you're leveraging in that environment, whether it be an elevator or a fax machine or a burglar panel or a fire panel. And that really helps scope out the totality of the project that you have. The second is then selecting a solution in the market that will meet the needs for your POTS replacement project. And the aim here for a lot of organizations is to not deploy multiple point solutions like the communicators that I mentioned earlier, rather finding a single solution that's very easy to manage, very easy to deploy, that can serve any device in your environment that's operating on an analog connection, and provide the right kind of visibility into the performance of the reliability. And then the third step is actually going through that installation process for a solution and understanding this is different in nature than phone systems and migrating from an on-prem PBX to a UCaaS solution, for instance. You're touching old wiring here, 66 blocks, if you're familiar with that. And so that really requires a different degree of project management and professional services or IT or facilities involvement to make that transition seamless.
So, Chris, you've covered audit, select, and install as the summary. Let's dive into this a little deeper. Let's go into audit.
Absolutely. So the audit process is really critical for organizations to perform themselves, or sometimes in conjunction with professional services and a site survey if necessary. But you really have to have a firm grasp on how many POTS lines do you have to begin with. And are they in use is another great question. You know, it's not uncommon to see customers who have paid for a POTS line for 20 years and it hasn't been used for 15, but they just kept paying for that particular POTS line. And that really helps define the high-level scope of the project. The second is because we're touching physical locations and we have to transition wiring, where are all these devices located? Do they run back into a central wiring closet in a minimum point of entry? Is it distributed in a larger environment across different MDFs and IDFs, for instance, that home back? And this really helps facilitate the installation process later on. And then the next step is understanding what that wiring looks like. Am I touching 66 blocks as we discussed earlier, or is it a little wall jack that I'm just unplugging an RJ11 cable and plugging it into a different device? And is the wiring sufficient? You know, you run into situations in very, very old buildings, maybe the rats eat through some of the copper wiring, for instance. And then the actual types of devices that you need to replace, whether it's simple voice-oriented solutions like elevators that are just making phone calls, or you get into fire panels, alarm panels that can operate like modems. And we've even seen modems too. People are actually using little modems still for communications. All of that really helps define the scope of what needs to be addressed to that environment and guides the solution to solve for that.
You know, it's hard to believe that people keep on paying for lines they're not using, but I can't keep my streaming services straight. I know that. I'm always surprised when I look at my credit card bill, and those kind of stand out even easier. Okay, let's get into the selecting your solution. Sam.
Hey, thanks. There's a lot of things that we need to consider as we're looking at selecting the solution. First and foremost, we need to look at what kind of regulations may be impacted. There are life safety systems such as fire alarm panels and so forth that do require NFPA 72 requirements. And those devices need to be able to traverse the internet on a private network rather than a public network. So that's one consideration. Another consideration is remote device management. It's pretty strenuous for corporations to maintain physical device checks and monitor their equipment physically. And so it's important to have a solution that you can do that remote and dial into those devices and check that out from afar. The next one is reputation. You know, there's a lot of small vendors in this space that are cropping up, and whether or not they're able to handle the solutions in a way that they should is a key component. So it's important to choose someone who has a proven track record. Support obviously is huge, and that's the next item. It's important to have 24/7/365 support, and that needs to be the goal on any solution that you choose. Next, choose a business that is going to be able to serve you beyond just POTS replacement. Look at the wide array of services that they provide and how they can provide your company with not only just this solution, but others out in other areas of your business that you need.
Okay, well, let's get into installing the solution. Chris, could you take us through what's involved in installing this?
Absolutely, and that's where it comes down to brass tacks. You know, the day comes, we need to migrate this over, and it's a process that you have to pay close attention to given the nature of some of these devices that will be impacted, especially if they're related to life safety systems. And so once you've gone through that site survey and audit and understand what your environment looks like, it's time to stage the devices and begin performing your testing on those devices. And what we recommend is that you test with brand new phone numbers, for instance, side by side with your POTS lines. And you do that to ensure that the critical devices will operate effectively with whatever POTS replacement solution that you deploy. This is particularly important for burglar panels and fire panels, especially those of an older nature that operate like a modem. You want to be sure that it's going to work. And then the second is to time your porting after you are sure that everything in the environment is going to operate. Because the key here is you're moving away from legacy infrastructure. Once you port that number away from a POTS line, you are not going back to that POTS line. It is done. And so it's critical to avoid any downtime. And we've seen this scenario in failed deployments before where they just initiated the port out of the gate. The solution didn't work. And now customers stuck with an elevator that's not functioning for emergency calling or fire panels that aren't working if an event happens. And there can be real liability risk here for organizations, including your local fire inspector coming in and fining you if you're not compliant. Or we've even seen situations where certificate of occupancies have been revoked because they're not compliant on elevators and fire panels.
Well, you said fines. Is this hard or easy?
Expensive if you're not in compliance.
So tell us how it could be easy.
Yeah, so picking the right kind of vendor for this solution that provides that broad latitude to connect any type of device in is going to be critical here. So you're not managing multiple different point solutions for all of the analog devices in your environment. Finding a vendor that has a very thorough project management methodology with a device that's very simple to deploy, both on your own or in conjunction with help. The remote management and monitoring, as Sam mentioned earlier, makes this very easy to do from afar. And again, having a good grasp on that wiring in the environment will allow this to be a very simple transition process. You can do all the testing in advance. And it can make the cadence on this actually quite rapid with the right solution.
You know, I look at that graphic and I just get an uneasy feeling just looking at that. But I have a feeling Sam has no visceral reaction to it whatsoever. Sam, tell us about the T-Mobile piece, the wireless piece.
Yeah, what we've put into place is a way that we can help deliver a pathway away from POTS dependency, T-Mobile and Ooma together. So as we've talked about before, there's all these critical life safety and other devices here, such as elevators and the blue light phones and the alarm panels and whatnot, but we'll help you move away from these. And while we do that, we'll help you save money. You can keep using the devices that you already have installed. So those legacy devices that may be in your buildings, there's no need to change those out. The solution that we have come up with and have together here is going to solve the situation. You don't have to change your devices. And we'll be able to go from day one and keep you going in your communications.
That seems like a pretty nice setup. Tell us more.
Well, as you can see here, we've created a secure and private internet connection, which we talked about. That solves the problems with seemingly regulation issues or whatnot. And also the excellent service that we can offer from project management, getting the services ordered, getting things sorted out as far as what the scope of your deployment would look like, and then getting it implemented and installed. And then also the exceptional post-sales support. We take care of everything from the full aspect of the project management side of it so that you guys as companies and customers can rest easy that this copper sunset won't impact you, but you can actually improve your situation and move forward into the future.
All right. Well, with that, I think we can move into questions and answers. Let's open up to if you have any questions. Let's get to them. Well, I know I learned a lot about the copper sunset but of course I thought the copper sunset was a cocktail. But let's get into some Q and questions and answers and to wrap this up. Let's see. We got a question here. How do I know that my communications will be secure if I move away from analog lines? You want to try that, Chris?
Yeah, sure. So it's a great question. And obviously the legacy PSTN network was isolated and secure. And so one of the important things to consider when evaluating POTS replacement solutions is if the traffic from those solutions is fully encrypted into the data centers that are providing them. And that's something that we do with AirDial, for instance, end to end.
Okay. We've got another question here. Will I have to replace all of the copper lines if I start down this path? Chris?
Eventually you will, absolutely. So as we discussed, this is a true ultimate sunset of all of the copper lines. So over a period of time, that ultimately all will get shut down.
Okay. All right, let's see here. What are the potential issues that could come up if we wait and see what will happen with our POTS lines? So why not just wait? Sam?
Yeah, that's a really good consideration. And one of the most important things to keep in mind here is the costs. So potential issues that anybody would run into is the costs are going to continue to rise. The carriers that are deprecating these lines and shutting them down are only going to continue to increase that cost while they service those lines. The other thing to keep in mind is that they may decommission the lines at any point in time. And you don't want to be left out in the lurch and not have a solution ready to go when that time comes.
I have found these end of life cycles actually that when they start raising the prices like you're talking about, the service also goes down. You pay more for less effectively. Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, that's going to be a factor that will come to play in this as well. That service may not be as reliable and consistent as you would need in each of the various situations that you have. One thing to also keep in mind is you don't want to lose any kind of communication with various aspects of your service, whether that's with your employees or tenants or customers. Those kind of things are definitely something that need to be considered as the timing or potential issues needs to be addressed.
All right, let's go to the next question here. I like this one actually because we know the old analog services provide power. So the question is, what? Okay, I'm sorry, I got the questions out of order here. Never mind. I'll come back to the power question. What makes AirDial different than other POTS replacement solutions, Chris?
Yeah, wonderful question. And hopefully, as you've learned a little bit today, there's some important factors to look at as part of this type of migration. The first is compliance around fire life safety systems. So fire panels in particular have very specific regulations. You don't want the local fire inspector coming in and wind up getting a fine or having a certificate of occupancy revoked. So things like NFPA 72 standards and meeting those standards and actual certifications like UL 864 go a long way, which is something that we've done for AirDial, and private cross connects into the T-Mobile network to ensure that it's fully private end-to-end traffic for those types of devices. Additionally, having visibility into your devices through a cloud-based management platform with notification capabilities so that you know if events are occurring. You can be alerted via SMS or email, for instance. And then the other thing that I would notate is having an end-to-end solution. So one of the things we've done with AirDial is it is 100% our own intellectual property. And this is really critical as you encounter more challenging devices, whether that's older fire panels, older burglar panels, or even modems in the environment. Having the ability to tweak that whole architecture end to end goes a long way to making devices operate effectively and efficiently.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Let's get to this power question now. If we lose power with AirDial, what kind of coverage do we have?
And so great question too, Dave. Another important thing to really contemplate as part of this, because the old POTS lines are line powered, obviously. And so we've done the same thing with AirDial and incorporated battery backup into that device, which is a removable, replaceable battery, so that if you lose power, all of these devices can still maintain communication. And if there's a device hanging off of AirDial that actually needs to be powered over that copper line, incidentally, we can do that same thing for those devices to make sure that secure, important communications can take place when there are power outages.
And so really, this could work well in critical locations like, say, elevator phones. Even if the power goes out and the elevator stops, the phone will still work.
That's right. Really important in that scenario. You think of an earthquake or something else. Definitely want the phone to work.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up the questions we got here. So with that, I'd like to thank I'd like to thank Chris and Sam for giving us some education here, and thank you all for watching.